Win this, and I'll give you $40 million. Billionaire laughed. Black Nanny's daughter did. His face went pale. His friends gathered closer. Their conversations dying as they sensed something electric in the air, something that transformed casual entertainment into something more dangerous. What would you have done if someone bet your future on your ability to prove them wrong? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. Win this, and I'll give you $40 million. Billionaire Richard Langston declared, pointing his manicured finger directly at 17-year-old Maya across his marble dining table. The room of wealthy guests erupted in cruel laughter, wine glasses clinking like wind chimes in a storm. Watching the black teenager whose mother cleaned their host's mansion every morning before dawn. What they didn't know was that Maya had been studying Richard's chess strategies for 3 years, memorizing every move, every weakness, waiting for this exact moment when his arrogance would finally become her opportunity. Have you ever watched someone's entire world change with a single move? Have you ever been underestimated because of who your parents are? Because of where you come from? Tonight, a billionaire's arrogance would meet a teenager's quiet brilliance. But what Maya discovered during that game would expose a secret that could destroy everything Richard built. The Lake Tahoe mansion glowed against the Nevada night like a crystal palace, floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the handcrafted chess pieces like warriors positioning for battle on a field of marble and mahogany. Richard lounged in his leather chair, Italian suit perfectly pressed, surrounded by his usual crowd of tech moguls and real estate kings who treated his dinner parties like exclusive clubs where cruelty was the membership fee. Maya sat across from him, her thrift store blazer clean but clearly secondhand, her natural hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that caught the chandelier light. She'd grown up invisible in this house. The nanny's daughter who did her homework at kitchen counters while wealthy children played in rooms she was only allowed to clean. But tonight, every eye in a room was on her, and she could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down like a physical force. Richard's son James leaned against the marble staircase, 19 years old, and everything his father's money could sculpt. His designer clothes couldn't hide the way he watched Maya with interest she pretended not to notice. That forbidden attraction had been building for months, simmering beneath the surface of class divisions and unspoken rules about who belonged where in their carefully structured world. She doesn't even know how the pieces move, laughed Patricia Westbrook, Richard's business partner, her diamond earrings catching the light as she shook her head in mock sympathy. This is embarrassing, even for you, Richard. But Maya's fingers moved with surgical precision as she arranged her pieces, each placement deliberate and calculated. She'd learned chess not from expensive tutors or private lessons, but from late nights on free websites, playing strangers from around the world who knew her only by her username and her skill. The opening moves began like a dance both players had rehearsed in their minds. Richard moved his pawn forward with the confidence of a man who'd never lost at anything that mattered to him. His friends gathered closer, their conversations dying as they sensed something electric in the air, something that transformed casual entertainment into something more dangerous. Maya's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her first piece, but her voice remained steady when she spoke. Interesting chess set. The ivory work is beautiful. Her fingers traced the carved details, noting craftsmanship that spoke of personal significance rather than mere luxury. What would you have done if someone bet your future on your ability to prove them wrong? Tell me in the comments. Richard studied her face, searching for signs of weakness or intimidation. Instead, he found something that made his confident smile begin to fade. Maya wasn't playing scared. She was playing angry. She was playing with the focused intensity of someone who'd been preparing for this battle her entire life. As Maya's fingers closed around her first pawn, she whispered something that made Richard's confident smile falter completely. "This one's for my father." The problem was, she'd never known who her father was. Every chess master knows the opening moves decide the game. But Maya was about to discover she'd been playing a match that started before she was born. The mansion had been Maya's second home since she was 8 years old, back when her mother Denise first arrived from Georgia with nothing but a suitcase and determination that could move mountains. Those early days felt like a lifetime ago, when Maya would sit at the kitchen table doing homework while wealthy children played video games in rooms worth more than most people's houses. She remembered watching through doorways as the Langston family lived their privileged life, studying their patterns like she'd later study chess strategies. Richard commanded every room he entered, his presence demanding attention and respect that people gave automatically because of his bank account. His wife Margaret floated through the house like expensive perfume, beautiful and untouchable, treating the staff with polite indifference that somehow felt worse than outright rudeness. But it was James who'd caught Maya's attention in ways that confused and frightened her. 3 years older, he'd grown from an awkward teenager into someone who made her heart race whenever he entered a room. She'd learned to keep her eyes down when he walked past, learned to make herself invisible when he brought friends home from his private school. The chess books had been her escape and her education. While cleaning Richard's study, she discovered his extensive collection of chess strategy guides, books written by grandmasters and champions that cost more than her mother made in a week. During those quiet afternoon hours when the family was out, Maya would carefully remove volumes from their shelves, memorizing openings and endgames, teaching herself the language of strategic thinking that would become her native tongue. She learned that chess wasn't just about moving pieces, it was about reading people, understanding psychology, recognizing patterns that others missed. Every game told a story about the players' minds, their fears, their blind spots, their deepest assumptions about power and control. Richard's chess style was aggressive and impatient, the approach of a man accustomed to winning through force rather than finesse. He bulldozed opponents with expensive lessons and superior equipment, assuming that money could buy mastery the same way it bought everything else in his life. But Maya had studied his games, watched him play against business associates who let him win because challenging him meant risking deals worth millions. The mansion's service quarters where she and her mother lived felt like a different planet from the main house. Their small apartment above the garage contained second-hand furniture and carefully patched clothes, but also held something the main house lacked: genuine warmth. Denise worked 18-hour days to give Maya opportunities, saving every spare dollar for chess tournament entry fees and college application costs. Have you ever learned something in secret, preparing for a moment you weren't sure would come? Share your hidden talents below. Maya's teenage awareness of James had grown complicated as she matured. She noticed how he looked at her when he thought no one was watching, noticed how his conversations with friends stopped when she entered a room. The attraction was mutual and forbidden, separated by invisible walls of class and expectation that seemed impossible to cross. During family gatherings, Maya would serve appetizers in clear glasses while James entertained guests with stories from his elite boarding school. But sometimes their eyes would meet across the crowded room, and she'd feel electricity that had nothing to do with the crystal chandeliers overhead. Those moments terrified her because they felt real in ways that nothing else in the mansion did. As Maya moved her second piece across the board, Richard leaned forward, studying not just her strategy, but her face with uncomfortable intensity. "You have your father's eyes," he murmured, then caught himself immediately. The words hung in the air like a confession he never meant to make. Denise had kept one secret for 18 years, a secret that could either destroy her daughter's future or finally give her the justice she deserved. The Georgia heat had been unbearable that summer of 2005, but it wasn't the weather that drove Denise north to Nevada. She was 23, pregnant, and running from a mistake that could have destroyed more lives than just her own. The Greyhound bus ticket to Reno represented her last $100 and her first real choice in months of impossible decisions. She'd been working as a hotel housekeeper in Atlanta when she met him, a businessman attending a tech conference, confident and charming in ways that made her forget every warning her mother had given her about powerful men who saw working women as temporary entertainment. 3 nights of stolen conversations in hotel corridors had led to one night of passion that changed everything. When the pregnancy test showed 2 lines, Denise knew she had 2 choices: demand child support from a man who could destroy her reputation with a single phone call, or disappear and build a life where her daughter could grow up without the shadow of scandal. The choice had been easier than it should have been. The nanny position with the Langston family had been a lifeline disguised as employment. Richard needed someone to care for his young son James while he traveled for business, and Denise needed a job that came with housing and health care. The irony of the situation, working for another wealthy family while carrying the child of a man from that same world, wasn't lost on her, but desperation made philosophers of everyone. Maya's birth had been the most beautiful and terrifying day of Denise's life. Holding her daughter in the hospital room paid for by the Langston family insurance, she made promises that felt like sacred vows. Maya would never know poverty the way Denise had known it. Maya would get an education that opened doors instead of slamming them shut. Maya would never have to choose between dignity and survival. The years that followed became a careful balance of visibility and invisibility. Denise worked harder than anyone else on Richard's staff, arriving before dawn and staying past sunset, making herself indispensable while keeping Maya safely in the background. She watched her daughter grow brilliant and beautiful, watched her develop a mind that could see patterns and connections that escaped people with expensive educations. The chess discovery had been Maya's own achievement, but Denise recognized the hunger behind it. Her daughter wasn't just learning a game. She was studying power, figuring out how to compete in a world that had never been designed for someone like her. Every tournament Maya entered, every opponent she defeated, proved that intelligence couldn't be bought or inherited, only cultivated through determination and practice. What would you sacrifice to protect your child's future? How far would you go to keep them safe? The hardest part wasn't keeping the secret. It was watching Maya wonder about her father, watching her create stories about who he might be and why he wasn't there. Denise had perfected responses to those questions over the years, half-truths that satisfied curiosity without revealing dangerous details. He was someone I knew briefly. It didn't work out. We're better off without him. But tonight, watching her daughter command the chessboard with moves that seemed hauntingly familiar, Denise felt the weight of 18 years of silence pressing against her chest like a physical force. Maya moved pieces with the same calculated precision, the same strategic patience, the same ruthless focus that she'd seen in another player years ago. Her phone buzzed against her apron pocket, the vibration making her heart skip. The text was from a number she'd blocked years ago, a number that shouldn't have been able to reach her. "I'm watching the game. She looks just like him." Someone else knew the truth, and they were about to use it. James Langston had everything money could buy, except the one thing he wanted most, and she was sitting across from his father, demolishing his king piece by piece. From his position on the marble staircase, James watched Maya with an intensity that made his chest tight. She'd grown up in his house like a ghost, the quiet girl who cleaned his room and served his meals. But somewhere along the way, she transformed into someone who made him question everything he'd been taught about his place in the world. He remembered the exact moment everything changed between them. Last Christmas, he'd walked into the guest bathroom without knocking, expecting it to be empty. Instead, he'd found Maya changing clothes after spilling wine on her server's uniform. The image of her standing there in simple cotton underwear, her skin glowing against the white marble, had burned itself into his memory with the intensity of a photograph. She grabbed a towel and looked at him with eyes that held no shame, only a quiet dignity that made him feel like the one who'd been caught doing something wrong. "Excuse me," she'd said simply, and he'd backed out of the room feeling like his world had shifted on its axis. That night, he'd lain awake replaying the moment, understanding for the first time that Maya wasn't just the help's daughter. She was a woman who could make his heart race and his plans crumble. The attraction had grown stronger over the months that followed. He'd started finding excuses to be in whatever room she was cleaning, started timing his arrivals home from college to coincide with her schedule. Their conversations were careful and brief, separated by invisible boundaries that both of them understood but neither acknowledged. "She's not just beautiful," he told his roommate during spring break. The admission dragged out of him after too many beers and too many sleepless nights. "She's dangerous. She sees everything, remembers everything. When she looks at you, It's like she's reading your mind and writing your story at the same time. His friends had laughed, made crude jokes about forbidden fruit, and slumming it with the help. But they didn't understand what James saw when he looked at Maya. They saw class differences and social boundaries. He saw intelligence that could cut through pretension like a blade, saw strength that had been forged in circumstances they'd never face. Tonight's chess game had revealed something that terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. Maya wasn't just smart. She was strategically brilliant, capable of outmaneuvering his father in ways that business rivals with Harvard degrees couldn't manage. Watching her command the board with quiet confidence, he realized he'd been in love with her for months without admitting it to himself. The way she moved her pieces spoke of hours of private study, of dedication that required sacrifice. While he'd been partying at Stanford with trust fund kids who treated college like an expensive social club, Maya had been preparing for battles he'd never have to fight. The contrast made him feel both privileged and ashamed. Have you ever wanted someone you knew you shouldn't? Someone from a different world than yours? As Maya captured Richard's bishop with a move that made the watching guests gasp, James stepped into the chandelier light. "Maya," he called softly, his voice carrying further than intended in the suddenly quiet room. When she looked up, her concentration broken for the first time all evening, Richard seized his chance to study her exposed position on the board. But James wasn't trying to help his father win. He was trying to warn her of something far worse approaching. He'd seen the text messages on his father's phone, seen the concerned looks between his parents, sensed undercurrents in conversations that stopped whenever he entered a room. Something about tonight was bigger than a chess game, and Maya was walking into danger she couldn't see. Maya had learned to read people like chess pieces, but tonight, everyone around her was playing a different game than the one she could see. Her mind operated on multiple levels simultaneously, a skill developed through years of existing in spaces where survival depended on understanding dynamics that others took for granted. The chessboard demanded her strategic attention, but her peripheral awareness tracked every shift in the room's energy, every whispered comment, every meaningful glance between Richard's guests. The online chess tournaments had taught her more than opening theory and endgame technique. They taught her that every opponent revealed their psychology through their playing style. Aggressive players attacked too early, defensive players waited too long for opportunities, and arrogant players made assumptions that skilled opponents could exploit ruthlessly. Richard's chess psychology was as predictable as his business tactics. He played like a man who'd never faced real consequences for losing, who assumed his superior resources guaranteed superior outcomes. But Maya had studied poverty and privilege with equal intensity, understood that hunger made better teachers than comfort ever could. She remembered those late nights in the apartment above the garage, her mother asleep after 16-hour workdays, while Maya battled strangers across digital boards that leveled every playing field. Username ChessQueen05 had no race, no class, no family history. Only the ability to see 3 moves ahead while opponents were still celebrating their last capture. The memory of learning chess felt like a lifetime ago, back when she discovered Richard's strategy books and realized they were maps to a world where intelligence mattered more than inheritance. Each stolen hour in his study had been an investment in a future she could barely imagine, preparation for opportunities that might never come. But tonight, as she positioned her knight to threaten Richard's queen, Maya sensed layers of meaning that had nothing to do with chess theory. The guests leaned forward with expressions that mixed entertainment with something darker, as if they were watching a gladiator match instead of a board game. Their whispered comments carried undertones of racial prejudice disguised as social observation, assumptions about her abilities that revealed more about their limitations than hers. James's presence near the staircase created a different kind of tension, one that made her skin warm despite the mansion's perfect climate control. She'd grown accustomed to ignoring her attraction to him, treating those feelings like pieces of a puzzle that could never be completed. But tonight his attention felt more intense, more dangerous, as if the chess game had removed barriers that normally kept their connection safely theoretical. When was the last time someone's simple touch left you breathless? Share your story in the comments. Maya deliberately exposed her king to test Richard's honor and reveal his character. A gentleman player would avoid taking advantage of an opponent's momentary distraction, but a ruthless competitor would seize any opening without hesitation. His response would tell her everything she needed to know about the man who'd shaped James's understanding of power and privilege. The chandelier light caught the carved details of the chess pieces, and for the first time, Maya noticed something that made her blood freeze with recognition. The set wasn't just expensive, it was personal. The ivory had been hand-carved with initials that seemed impossible, dates that aligned too perfectly with her own history. Her next move would put Richard's queen in danger, but as she reached for her piece, the initials on the chessboard's edge became clearly visible under the overhead light. RL and MD. Georgia, 2005. Her mother's initials. Her birth year. The same year Denise had fled Georgia for reasons she'd never fully explained. Maya's hand trembled slightly as she made her next move, but her voice remained steady as she spoke. Interesting chess set. Where did you get it? The question hung in the air between them, like an accusation waiting to be proven, like a secret demanding to be revealed. The chess set held secrets that could shatter everything Maya thought she knew about her life, and Richard's face had gone pale as winter snow. Richard's fingers traced the carved initials like they were burning his skin, his confident businessman mask cracking to reveal something raw and desperate underneath. The room had gone deadly quiet, wealthy guests sensing drama that promised to be better entertainment than any chess game could provide. "This belonged to someone I knew long ago," Richard said carefully, his voice tight with control that was slipping by the second. "Someone who meant everything to me before circumstances tore us apart." Maya felt the world tilt sideways as pieces of her mother's mysterious past began clicking together like puzzle pieces she'd been searching for her entire life. Her mother had worked in Georgia hotels. Richard had business there in 2005. The timing aligned with terrifying precision that made her stomach drop like she was falling from a great height. The carved chess pieces seemed to mock her with their elegant craftsmanship, each one a monument to a connection she'd never suspected existed. The king and queen faced each other across the board like lovers separated by war, their ivory faces worn smooth by years of handling that spoke of private games and intimate moments. James moved closer to the table, his expensive shoes silent on marble floors, but Maya caught the way his jaw tightened when he saw the initials his father was trying to hide. The recognition in his eyes was unmistakable. He knew exactly whose initials those were, had probably heard the story behind them during family conversations she was never meant to overhear. Have you ever discovered something that changed everything you thought you knew about your family? Tell us your story. Maya, it's your move, Richard said, but his voice carried undertones that had nothing to do with chess strategy. He was studying her face with the intensity of a man looking for confirmation of suspicions he'd carried for years, searching for features that might reflect his own bloodline. The mansion felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in around secrets that had been hiding in plain sight. Maya's mother cleaned this house every morning, polished these same chess pieces, dusted the shelves where Richard kept photos of business trips that might have included Georgia conferences and hotel meetings with young housekeepers who caught his attention. Maya's hand hovered over her next piece, but her mind was racing through implications that made her feel sick and angry and confused all at once. If Richard was her father, then James was her half-brother. The attraction she'd been fighting for months became something twisted and wrong, feelings that violated boundaries she'd never known existed. But Richard's expression held more than recognition. It held guilt that ran deeper than simple abandonment. The way he watched her suggested secrets that went beyond one night of passion, complications that made her mother's flight to Nevada seem less like escape and more like necessary survival. Patricia Westbrook leaned forward with predatory interest, her diamond jewelry catching light as she sensed scandal brewing. "Richard, you look like you've seen a ghost. Or perhaps something more interesting than that." Her voice carried the cruel amusement of someone who lived for other people's destruction. The text message that had made her mother go pale earlier suddenly made horrible sense. Someone else knew about Georgia. Someone else understood the connection between Richard Langston and the teenage girl who was systematically destroying him on his own chessboard with moves that seemed to echo his own strategic thinking. Maya made her next move with deliberate precision, capturing Richard's queen with a combination he never saw coming. But as his ivory queen toppled onto the marble board, she whispered words that made the entire room go silent. "Tell me about Georgia, Daddy." The chess game had become something far more dangerous than competition. It had become a reckoning 18 years in the making. James felt his world explode into 1,000 pieces as the truth hit him like a physical blow. The girl he'd been falling for was his own sister. The word "Daddy" echoed through the dining room like a gunshot, and James watched his father's face crumble with the weight of secrets finally exposed to daylight. Every stolen glance at Maya, every racing heartbeat when she entered a room, every fantasy he'd entertained about crossing class boundaries suddenly became something sick and impossible. His legs nearly gave out as memories crashed together with devastating clarity. The way his father always insisted Maya and her mother stay for family dinners during holidays. The college fund Richard had mysteriously established for staff children that only Maya seemed to benefit from. The careful way his mother watched Maya grow up, like she was studying a living reminder of her husband's betrayal. James stumbled backward until his shoulders hit the marble wall, his Stanford education useless against the emotional chaos tearing through his chest. Every literature class that had explored forbidden love stories suddenly felt like cruel preparation for a reality he never saw coming. Romeo and Juliet had family feuds. He had DNA that made his feelings criminal. "You knew," Maya said, and she wasn't talking to Richard anymore. Her dark eyes found James across the room with an expression that mixed heartbreak and rage in equal measure. "You've known all along, haven't you? That's why you've been watching me like that. That's why every conversation felt dangerous." The accusation hit harder than truth because it was partially wrong in ways that made it worse. James hadn't known, but he'd suspected something was different about Maya's place in their household, something that explained why his father paid for her chess tournaments and his mother never quite met her eyes during family gatherings. Richard's business associates exchanged glances heavy with the kind of gossip that could destroy reputations and end political careers. A tech billionaire with an illegitimate daughter was one thing. A tech billionaire who'd abandoned his pregnant mistress while she cleaned hotel rooms was the kind of scandal that tabloids would pay millions to expose. Have you ever realized your deepest feelings were completely wrong? Share how you handled impossible situations. "James didn't know," Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I swear to you, he didn't know. I thought if I kept you both separate, if I never acknowledged what happened in Georgia, maybe the past could stay buried where it belonged." But Maya was already standing, her chess victory forgotten as she processed betrayal that went deeper than absent fathers and family secrets. She'd spent months fighting attraction to someone she thought was forbidden because of class differences, never imagining the prohibition came from blood they shared. James pushed off from a wall and moved toward her, his expensive clothes suddenly feeling like costumes in a play he didn't want to perform. "Maya, please. I swear I didn't know. Every feeling I had for you, God, I thought I was falling in love with you. I thought the biggest problem was that you were the help's daughter." The confession hung between them like a bridge that had already caught fire. Love declarations usually brought people together. This one was tearing them apart with the force of fundamental impossibility. Every moment of tension between them, every careful conversation, every stolen glance became evidence of something that should never have existed. Maya's mother appeared in the dining room doorway like she'd been summoned by the chaos. Her uniform wrinkled from rushing upstairs when she heard voices raised in ways that meant her carefully constructed world was falling apart. The look that passed between Denise and Richard carried 18 years of silence and sacrifice, decisions that had protected everyone until this moment when protection became its own form of destruction. "Pack your things," Maya told her mother without looking away from James. "We're leaving tonight." But as she turned toward the door, Richard's next words stopped her cold. "You can't leave now. There's something else you need to know about that night in Georgia." Denise had built her life on one lie, but the truth she'd been hiding was far worse than anyone in that room could imagine. Standing in the doorway of Richard's dining room, still wearing her housekeeper's uniform, Denise looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past hour. The careful balance she'd maintained for 18 years, keeping Maya safe while staying close enough to watch over her, had crumbled the moment her daughter sat down at that chessboard. "Maya, baby, we need to go home and talk about this privately," Denise said, but her voice shook with the kind of fear that meant privacy was the last thing she actually wanted. Private conversations meant questions she'd spent nearly 2 decades avoiding, truths that could destroy more than just Richard's reputation. Richard stood slowly, his businessman's posture replaced by something smaller and more desperate. "Denise, please. She deserves to know everything. We can't keep protecting people from the truth when it's already destroying them." The wealthy guests had formed a semicircle around the drama, like vultures circling roadkill, their phones discreetly positioned to capture whatever explosion was about to happen. Patricia Westbrook's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of someone watching enemies tear each other apart without having to lift a finger. Maya remained frozen beside the chessboard, her mother's initials carved into ivory pieces that had witnessed whatever happened in Georgia 18 years ago. The game she'd been winning suddenly felt insignificant compared to the larger contest between truth and deception that had been playing out her entire life. "There was no hotel conference," Denise said finally, the words falling like stones into still water. "Richard never came to Atlanta on business. I went to him. I drove 8 hours to his family's vacation house in Savannah because I had something he needed to know." The admission shifted the entire room's energy as people realized they'd been watching the wrong story unfold. This wasn't about a powerful man taking advantage of a working woman. This was about secrets that ran deeper and darker than anyone had suspected. James pressed his back against the marble wall like it was the only thing keeping him upright. His half-sister revelation had been devastating enough. Now, he was learning that the foundation story of that relationship might be built on deception that changed everything he thought he understood about his family. "What would you do if everything you believed about your parents turned out to be wrong?" "I was already pregnant when I went to Georgia," Denise continued, her voice growing stronger with each confession. "Maya wasn't conceived there. She was conceived 3 months earlier in this house, during the staff Christmas party when everyone else had gone home and Richard and I made the biggest mistake of our lives." The chess pieces seemed to mock them with their silent witness to revelations that kept getting worse. Maya wasn't just Richard's daughter. She was the product of an affair that had happened under Margaret's own roof, in the same house where Maya had grown up invisible and ignored by the woman whose marriage she represented the destruction of. Richard's face went white as he processed implications that terrified him. "Then why did you go to Georgia? Why did you tell me you were leaving if you weren't running from what happened between us?" Denise's hands trembled as she reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper that looked like it had been carried for years. The document was yellowed with age and worn soft from handling, like something that had been read and reread countless times. "Because I found something that proved Maya wasn't yours," she whispered. "The DNA test I had done secretly showed she belonged to someone else entirely. Someone dangerous. Someone who would have killed us both if he'd known she existed. Maya's real father wasn't a billionaire or a businessman. He was the kind of man who made people disappear when they became inconvenient." The DNA test results hit the room like a bomb exploding in slow motion. Richard staggered backward as 18 years of assumed responsibility crumbled around him, while Maya felt her identity shift again like sand beneath her feet. Every assumption she'd made about her parentage, every conclusion she'd drawn from tonight's revelations, had been built on foundations that were completely wrong. Denise unfolded the paper with hands that shook like autumn leaves, revealing medical documents that bore official seals and laboratory stamps. The genetic markers had been highlighted in yellow, numbers and percentages that told a story of scientific certainty that left no room for doubt or wishful thinking. "Your real father is Vincent Torres," Denise said, the name falling from her lips like a curse she'd been carrying for too long. He was Richard's business partner back then, before everything went wrong, before the money laundering charges and the federal investigation that sent him underground. Maya's knees nearly buckled as she processed information that made Richard's secrets seem innocent by comparison. Vincent Torres wasn't just absent. He was actively dangerous, the kind of man who solved problems with violence and intimidation rather than lawyers and money. The wealthy guests exchanged glances that mixed horror with fascination, realizing they'd stumbled into a crime story that could make headlines for months. Patricia Westbrook's phone was already buzzing with messages as news of the evening's revelations began spreading through social circles that thrived on scandal and destruction. James pushed off from the wall, his face cycling through emotions too complex for simple categorization. Relief that Maya wasn't his sister battled with terror about what her actual parentage meant for everyone in the room. Vincent Torres had a reputation that made Richard's business rivals seem like choir boys. Crossing him meant consequences that money couldn't fix. Have you ever learned something about your family that changed everything? Tell us how you handled shocking revelations. The Christmas party affair with Richard was my attempt to create a cover story, Denise continued, her voice growing steadier as 18 years of deception finally spilled into the open. I needed Maya to have a father who could protect her, someone powerful enough to keep Vincent from looking too closely if he ever discovered she existed. The chess game lay forgotten on its marble board, pieces scattered from Maya's earlier victory that now seemed like a lifetime ago. The $40 million bet had become irrelevant compared to stakes that involved survival rather than money, family secrets that carried consequences far more serious than embarrassment or social ostracism. Richard's expensive suit couldn't hide the way his hands trembled as he processed the magnitude of the situation. For 18 years, he believed he was protecting his illegitimate daughter's reputation. Now he discovered he'd been harboring the child of a man who would kill everyone in this room without hesitation if he knew where to find them. "Vincent has been looking for us," Denise whispered, her eyes darting toward windows that suddenly seemed less like portals to beautiful views and more like vulnerabilities that could be breached by dangerous men with unfinished business. "The private investigator I hired told me he's been asking questions in Atlanta, showing your photograph to people who knew me back then." Maya felt her world spinning out of control as she realized the chess victory that had felt like her greatest achievement was about to become the thing that destroyed her mother's carefully constructed hiding place. The game had been live-streamed to Richard's business network, her face broadcast to people who might recognize her resemblance to a man they'd hoped never to see again. The mansion's security suddenly felt inadequate against threats that operated outside the legal system, and Maya understood with crystal clarity that winning tonight's game had painted targets on everyone she cared about. Maya had won the chess game, but her victory was about to cost everyone in that room their lives. The realization hit like cold water that her face had been broadcast to hundreds of Richard's business associates, including people who'd known Vincent Torres before his criminal empire forced him underground. Her resemblance to her father wasn't subtle. She had his distinctive cheekbones, his intense stare, his way of tilting her head when she was thinking strategically. Richard was already on his phone, his fingers moving frantically across the screen as he tried to contact security companies and private protection services that specialized in threats that existed outside normal legal channels. But Maya could see the panic in his eyes as he realized that money and connections meant nothing against a man who'd built his reputation on making wealthy people disappear when they became inconvenient. "How long do we have?" James asked, and Maya felt grateful that he'd shifted immediately into survival mode instead of dwelling on the emotional chaos of the past hour. His Stanford education might not have prepared him for this situation, but his privileged upbringing had taught him to think strategically under pressure. Denise was already moving toward the stairs, her housekeeper's efficiency kicking in as she mentally cataloged everything they'd need to disappear again. Vincent moves fast when he wants something. If someone recognized Maya and made a phone call, We have maybe 6 hours before he has people at the front door." The wealthy guests were streaming toward exits like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Their evening of entertainment transformed into something that could get them killed by association. Patricia Westbrook paused long enough to delete the photos she'd taken, understanding that scandal was amusing, but survival required different priorities entirely. Maya felt 17 years of carefully constructed identity crumbling around her as she processed the magnitude of her situation. She wasn't just the daughter of a cleaning woman who'd overcome class barriers through chess mastery. She was the child of a criminal who would view her existence as either an asset to be exploited or a liability to be eliminated. Have you ever had to choose between safety and staying with the people you love? What did you decide? "We need to split up," Richard said, closing his phone after a conversation that had obviously gone badly. Vincent's people are already monitoring airports and bus stations in a 3-state radius. Someone definitely made that call. James stepped forward with determination that surprised everyone in the room. "Maya's coming with me. I've got resources Vincent doesn't know about, places he can't track, people who owe me favors that have nothing to do with my father's business connections." The offer hung between them like a bridge across impossible circumstances. 20 minutes ago, Maya had thought James was her half-brother and their attraction was forbidden. Now she discovered he wasn't related to her at all, but dating him meant staying close to danger that could kill everyone she cared about. "I won't let you get hurt because of me," Maya said. But James was already shaking his head with the stubborn determination of someone who'd made a decision that wasn't up for negotiation. Too late for that conversation. We're already involved. The question is whether we face this together or separately. Denise grabbed Maya's shoulders, 18 years of protective instincts crystallizing into desperate intensity. "Baby, you need to understand what Vincent is capable of. He doesn't just hurt people, he erases them. Their families, their friends, anyone who might remember they existed. Running with James means painting a target on the Langston family that will never disappear." As if summoned by her words, the mansion's security system began flashing red warnings that meant armed intruders had breached the perimeter. Vincent Torres had found them faster than anyone thought possible, and now they had minutes instead of hours to decide who lived and who died. Vincent Torres had spent 18 years searching for the daughter he never knew existed, and tonight she practically announced herself on live television by playing chess exactly like him. The black SUVs rolled up Richard's circular driveway like death itself, coming to collect overdue debts. Vincent stepped out of the lead vehicle wearing a perfectly pressed suit that couldn't hide the dangerous energy radiating from every calculated movement. At 45, he maintained a lean build and sharp eyes that had made him successful in businesses that didn't advertise their services publicly. His men spread across the mansion grounds with military precision, their movements coordinated through earpieces and hand signals that spoke of extensive training in situations where mistakes meant body bags. Vincent had built his empire on the principle that fear worked better than friendship, and tonight he was bringing 18 years of accumulated patience to bear on the people who'd stolen his blood from him. The mansion's security cameras showed him Maya's face in perfect high definition, and Vincent felt something twist in his chest that might have been pride if he'd been capable of such normal emotions. She had his bone structure, his intense stare, and most importantly, his strategic mind that could see 5 moves ahead while opponents were still celebrating their last victory. "Sir, thermal imaging shows 8 people still inside," reported Carlos, his second-in-command who'd been with him since the early days when their operations were smaller and their methods were more direct. "The main family is gathered in the dining room, but there's movement toward the back stairs." Vincent studied the mansion's blueprints on his tablet, memorizing every exit and hiding place with the thoroughness that had kept him alive through federal investigations and rival gang wars. Richard Langston's home was designed for comfort and display, not defense against people who understood how to breach security systems designed to keep out normal criminals. The girl, his daughter, had broadcast her existence to exactly the wrong audience through Richard's business network. Vincent had spent decades building a reputation that made smart people avoid mentioning his name in casual conversation. But Maya had inadvertently sent her face directly to associates who remembered when he disappeared and why. Have you ever discovered you had family you never knew existed? How far would you go to claim them? She moves pieces like I do, Vincent murmured, watching recorded footage of Maya's chess game on his phone. Every capture, every strategic sacrifice, every patient setup for devastating combinations echoed his own playing style in ways that made DNA tests unnecessary. This girl was his legacy, his continuation, the proof that his intelligence could survive in a package that society would never suspect of carrying his particular brand of dangerous thinking. The federal investigation that had driven him underground had cost him everything he'd built legitimately, forcing him into businesses that operated in shadows and settled disputes with methods that left no witnesses. But looking at Maya command that chessboard with ruthless precision, Vincent realized he'd gained something more valuable than money or real estate. He'd created someone who could think like him without the scars that came from his particular education. His phone buzzed with a text from an associate who'd recognized Maya during the live stream. That's definitely Torres' blood. She has his eyes and his tactical mind. What do you want me to do with this information? Vincent had replied with coordinates and instructions that would bring Maya home, whether she wanted to come or not. Standing in Richard Langston's driveway, surrounded by men who'd followed him through situations that normal people couldn't survive, Vincent felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Genuine excitement about the future. Maya wasn't just his daughter. She was his successor, the person who could take everything he'd built and make it legitimate again. The mansion's front doors opened before he could knock, revealing Richard Langston looking older than his 53 years and infinitely less confident than the billionaire who dominated boardrooms across 3 states. "Hello, Richard," Vincent said, his voice carrying 18 years of patience finally reaching its conclusion. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Maya stood at the top of the back staircase, facing the most important decision of her life. Follow her mother into hiding again, or walk downstairs and meet the father who'd been hunting her since birth. The voices drifting up from the main floor carried undertones of barely controlled violence that made every survival instinct her mother had taught her scream for immediate escape. But something deeper, something that had driven her to master chess and challenge billionaires to games she was supposed to lose, whispered that running would only delay this confrontation until circumstances were less favorable. Through the staircase windows, she could see men positioned around the property with the kind of spacing that suggested military training and serious weapons. These weren't ordinary criminals or hired muscle. They were professionals who treated violence like a business and conducted that business with efficiency that left no room for negotiation or mercy. Denise grabbed Maya's arm with desperate strength. 18 years of protective instincts crystallizing into physical force that was meant to drag her daughter away from danger. "We have 5 minutes to reach the service tunnel before they finish surrounding the house. After that, we're trapped here with a man who kills people for disappointing him." But Maya was studying the positioning of Vincent's men through different windows, her chess-trained mind automatically calculating angles and possibilities that others might miss. The professional spacing that looked so threatening also revealed something important. These men were positioned to contain and capture, not to storm the building with maximum violence. "He doesn't want to hurt me," Maya realized aloud, the understanding hitting her like revelation that changed everything about their situation. "Look at how they're positioned. This is a retrieval operation, not an attack. He's here to collect his daughter, not to start a war." James appeared at the top of the stairs, his expensive clothes torn from helping Richard's security team activate emergency protocols that were designed for corporate espionage rather than criminal assault. His face was flushed with adrenaline and fear that made him look younger than his 19 years, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "My father's trying to negotiate with him downstairs. Vincent wants to meet you, but he's promising safe passage for everyone else if you come voluntarily." James swallowed hard before continuing. "He also said he'd consider your mother's safety a personal priority if you showed him the respect of facing him directly." The offer hung in the air like a chess move that demanded careful analysis before response. Maya had spent her life being underestimated because of her age and her background, but Vincent Torres was offering to treat her like an equal player in a game where the stakes were measured in lives rather than money. What would you do if you had to choose between safety and meeting a parent who might destroy you? Share your thoughts below. Maya closed her eyes and let her mind work the same way it did during complicated chess positions, calculating outcomes 3 moves ahead while her heart hammered against her ribs. Running meant spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, changing identities every few years, never building anything permanent because Vincent's resources could eventually track anyone who tried to disappear. Meeting him meant walking into unknown territory with a man whose reputation was built on eliminating problems rather than solving them diplomatically. But it also meant finally getting answers to questions that had haunted her entire life, understanding where her strategic mind came from and what it might be capable of under different circumstances. "I'm going down," Maya announced, her voice carrying the same quiet confidence she'd used during the chess game that had started this entire confrontation. "But I'm going as myself, not as his prisoner or his property. If Vincent Torres wants to meet his daughter, he could do it on equal terms or not at all." She started down the main staircase before anyone could argue, her footsteps echoing through marble halls like drumbeats announcing a meeting 18 years in the making. The dining room felt like a courtroom where Maya was simultaneously the judge, the jury, and the defendant in a trial that would determine the rest of her life. Vincent Torres stood beside the chessboard where Maya had defeated Richard just hours earlier, his presence filling the room with an energy that made expensive furniture seem fragile and temporary. Up close, the family resemblance was undeniable. They shared the same intense stare, the same way of holding their heads when analyzing complex situations, the same unconscious habit of drumming fingers against surfaces when thinking strategically. "You play beautifully," Vincent said, his voice carrying genuine admiration that somehow made him more dangerous rather than less threatening. "I've been watching recordings of your tournament games for the past 2 years. You have instincts that can't be taught, only inherited." Maya remained standing near the doorway, close enough to retreat, but positioned to command the room's attention. Every lesson her mother had taught her about reading dangerous men was screaming warnings about the controlled violence that radiated from Vincent's perfectly calm exterior. But her chess training recognized something else: respect for an opponent who deserved careful consideration. Richard sat slumped in his leather chair, like a king who just realized his kingdom was built on land that belonged to someone else. His billionaire confidence had evaporated under Vincent's casual display of power, replaced by the hollow understanding that money meant nothing against someone who operated outside systems that money could influence. The armed men positioned around the room's perimeter weren't pointing weapons at anyone, but their presence transformed casual conversation into a high-stakes negotiation where every word carried consequences that extended far beyond hurt feelings or damaged relationships. Maya could feel the weight of their attention, like a physical force pressing against her skin. "What do you want from me?" Maya asked directly, her voice steady despite the chaos churning in her chest. 18 years of wondering about her father had prepared her for many scenarios, but none of them had involved criminal empires and armed confrontations in billionaire dining rooms. Vincent smiled, and Maya felt a chill of recognition as she realized she'd seen that exact expression in mirrors after winning particularly challenging chess matches. The ruthless satisfaction of a predator who'd successfully cornered prey that had given them an entertaining hunt. "I want to offer you choices your mother never had," Vincent replied, moving closer to the chessboard where Maya's victory over Richard was still displayed in ivory pieces. "You've spent 17 years proving you have my mind and my strategic thinking. Now I want to show you what those gifts can accomplish when they're not limited by other people's moral boundaries." Have you ever met someone who saw potential in you that terrified and excited you at the same time? Tell us about it. Maya felt the dangerous appeal of his offer like gravity, pulling her toward a cliff that promised either flight or destruction. She'd always known her strategic mind was capable of more than chess tournaments and college scholarships, But she'd never imagined applying those same skills to the kind of problems that Vincent's business empire specialized in solving. Denise appeared in the doorway behind Maya, her face pale with 18 years of worst fears finally materializing in front of her. "Maya, baby, please remember everything I taught you about the difference between power and wisdom. He's offering you strength, but the price is your soul." Vincent's eyes shifted to Denise with an expression that mixed old affection with fresh disappointment. "You stole 18 years of my daughter's life from me. You denied her the education and opportunities that come with understanding who she really is. Don't compound that betrayal by trying to limit her choices now that she's old enough to make them herself." The chess pieces on the marble board seemed to watch as 3 generations of consequences finally converged in a moment that would reshape everyone's future, with Maya holding the power to decide whether that future included forgiveness or revenge. Maya picked up the ivory king from the chess set and held it between them like a weapon that could either build bridges or burn them completely. "Let's make this interesting," Maya said, her voice carrying the same quiet confidence that had demolished Richard's strategy just hours earlier. "You want me to choose between my mother's world and yours? Fine. But I propose we settle this the same way I've settled every important decision in my life, with a chess game." Vincent's eyebrows rose with something that might have been pride or might have been predatory interest in fresh prey. The idea of reducing 18 years of separation and multiple felony charges to 64 squares and 32 pieces should have been insulting, but Maya could see him running calculations that suggested he found the proposal more intriguing than offensive. "What stakes?" Vincent asked, his tone suggesting that games without meaningful consequences weren't worth playing. Around the room's perimeter, his armed men shifted slightly, their professional alertness sharpening as they sensed negotiations entering dangerous territory where their employer's decisions could reshape everyone's immediate future. Maya set the king back on the board with deliberate precision, her fingers steady despite the weight of everyone's attention focused on her next words. "If I win, you disappear from our lives forever. No more searching, no more investigators, no more threatening the people who protected me. You go back underground and stay there." The offer hung in the air like a challenge that carried implications far beyond simple game playing. Maya was essentially proposing to gamble her freedom against Vincent's 18-year obsession with finding her, betting everything on her ability to outthink a man who'd built a criminal empire through strategic brilliance and ruthless execution. Vincent moved closer to the chessboard, his expensive suit and calm demeanor unable to hide the dangerous energy that made Richard's business associates keep their distance from anything resembling confrontation. "And if I win?" Maya felt her mother's sharp intake of breath from the doorway, understood that Denise was watching her daughter walk toward a precipice that had been waiting for this moment since the night she fled Georgia with secrets that could destroy multiple families. But Maya's chess training had taught her that the most dangerous positions often offered the greatest opportunities for players willing to risk everything on superior preparation. "If you win, I come with you willingly. No resistance, no attempts to escape, no looking back. But you guarantee my mother's safety, and you leave the Langston family out of whatever business brought you here tonight." James stepped forward from his position near the marble staircase, his face cycling through emotions that range from admiration to terror as he processed the magnitude of what Maya was proposing. "You can't gamble your entire future on one game. This is insane." But Vincent was already nodding with the satisfaction of someone who'd found exactly the kind of challenge that made life interesting after decades of victories that had come too easily. "I accept your terms. One game, winner takes everything, no appeals or second chances. What's the biggest risk you've ever taken on your own abilities? Share your high-stakes moments below." Maya began setting up the chess pieces with movements that had become automatic through thousands of hours of practice. But her mind was racing through strategic possibilities that extended far beyond opening theory and endgame technique. She was essentially playing for her soul against a man who'd spent 18 years wanting nothing more than to claim her as his legacy. The room fell silent except for the soft clicking of ivory against marble as Maya and Vincent prepared for a game that would determine whether she spent the rest of her life running from her father or learning to become exactly like him. As Maya reached for her first pawn, she whispered a prayer to whatever gods protected daughters from the sins of fathers they'd never known. The final game lasted 4 hours, and when it ended, Maya understood that some victories cost more than defeats ever could. Vincent played like a man possessed, every move calculated with the precision of someone who'd spent decades turning strategic thinking into survival skills. But Maya had advantages he couldn't account for. She'd learned chess from desperation rather than privilege, studied strategy books in stolen moments rather than expensive lessons, developed her skills against opponents who had nothing to lose because losing was their default setting. The watching crowd had dwindled as the night wore on, Richard's wealthy guests finding excuses to leave before dawn brought consequences they didn't want to witness. Only the core players remained. Maya and Vincent across the board from each other, Denise and James watching from the sidelines, Richard slumped in his chair like a king who'd already abdicated his throne. As the game progressed, Maya began to understand her father in ways that 18 years of wondering had never provided. His playing style revealed a mind that trusted no one, planned for betrayal as a basic operating principle, and viewed every relationship as a potential weapon to be used or discarded based on strategic necessity. But Vincent's greatest strength was also his fatal weakness. He played chess like he lived life, assuming that superior force and better resources guaranteed victory against opponents who were smaller, younger, and less experienced in the art of destroying enemies. He never considered that Maya might be playing an entirely different game than the one he thought they'd agreed to. The end game arrived with the slow inevitability of sunrise, pieces traded away until only essentials remained on the board between them. Maya's king stood protected by a carefully constructed fortress of pawns and minor pieces, while Vincent's more aggressive strategy had left his position exposed in ways that experience should have taught him to avoid. "Checkmate," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying exhaustion and something that might have been grief for opportunities that would never exist between them. Vincent stared at the board for long moments, his strategic mind running through variations that all led to the same inevitable conclusion. Have you ever won something important but felt sad about what it cost you? Tell us about your complicated victories. Vincent rose from his chair with the dignity of someone who'd always understood that every game eventually ended, regardless of how skillfully the players had maneuvered their pieces during the middle phases. His men shifted nervously around the room's perimeter, uncertain about protocol for situations where their employer had been legitimately outplayed by a teenager. "You have my word," Vincent said, extending his hand across the chessboard in a gesture that somehow managed to convey both respect and final goodbye. "I'll disappear from your life as completely as I appeared in it. But Maya, remember that you'll always carry part of me with you, whether you want to or not." Maya shook his hand briefly, feeling calluses that spoke of harder years than his current wealth could erase, understanding that she was touching the genetic source of her own strategic abilities. "I'll remember, but I'll use what you gave me to build things instead of tearing them down." Vincent smiled one last time, the expression carrying 18 years of regret and possibility that would never be explored. "Perhaps that's exactly what the world needs, someone with my mind but your mother's heart." He turned toward the door where his men were already forming up for departure, then paused. "Take care of yourself, Maya. You're the best game I ever played, even though I lost." The black SUVs disappeared into pre-dawn darkness, carrying Vincent Torres back to whatever shadows had hidden him for 18 years. Maya stood at the mansion's front window, watching their taillights fade, holding a victory that felt more like losing the father she'd finally found just long enough to let him go forever. But as sunlight began painting the Nevada sky, Maya realized she'd won something more valuable than safety. She'd won the right to choose who she became, free from both her father's criminal legacy and her mother's fearful limitations. The Queen's gambit was complete, and Maya Torres Walker was finally free to write her own ending.